Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Passover. That's Exodus chapters 11 through and 12 in our continuing study of the book of Exodus. Exodus 11:1. Now the Lord said to Moses, one more plague I will bring on Pharaoh. This is going to be the last of the plagues, the last of 10, and on Egypt. And after that, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out of here completely. He's not just going to let you go. He's going to make sure you never come back. Verse 2, speak now in the hearing of the people, that each man ask from his neighbor, and each woman from her neighbor, for articles of silver and articles of gold. The Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Furthermore, the man Moses himself was greatly esteemed in the land of Egypt, both in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. What's going to happen? They're going to ask for 400 years of back pay. They've been slaves all this time in Egypt, and so they're going to seek this from their neighbors. Their Egyptian neighbors at this point are just going to be glad to be rid of them. Moses said, thus says the Lord, about midnight I am going out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt will die. From the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, all the firstborn of the cattle as well. Moreover, there shall be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been before, and such as shall never be again. So, every firstborn, doesn't matter if it's man or animal, it doesn't even matter if it's Jewish, Israeli, or Egyptian. All the firstborn are going to die. That's the universality of the promise. A universality of class, slave or free, of race, Jewish or Hebrew or Egyptian, doesn't matter. Universality of gender, male or female. Universality of age, doesn't matter if you're old or you're young. If you're the firstborn, you're going to die. Universality of species. Animals, man, all firstborn are going to die. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. This is going to reset the calendar, and from now on, in the Jewish calendar, not the civil calendar that they borrowed later on from the Babylonians, but in the religious calendar, this is going to be the first month. It will be in the spring. It is to be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves, according to their father's household, a lamb for each household. So they're to take a lamb, and one lamb for each household. That's verse 3. And it's to be unblemished in verse 4. It can't have any there's no defects, nothing wrong with it. It will be a male lamb, and it will be 1 year old. That is, in the prime of its life. And this lamb is going to serve as a substitute. The lamb will be taken and killed, and the lamb will die instead of the firstborn within that household. He goes on to say, you will keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. By the way, it's no mistake that Jesus, and we're going to describe him in a bit as our Passover lamb, that he died just before the sun went down. He was on the cross all day, and then died at the 9th hour. That is, in the evening, before the sun would set. And this is the principle of identification, where you're going to keep the lamb, you're going to set it apart on the 10th day, and keep it until the 14th day, so it will be with you. It will be almost, in a sense, part of your family. It will be identified with you, and then it is to be put to death. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat. So, over the door on the lintel, and on each side of the door on the doorpost, the blood is to be applied. This is the principle of application. It doesn't do any good merely to have killed the lamb. If the blood is not applied, it doesn't do anything, doesn't accomplish anything. They shall eat the flesh. They're to kill the lamb, they're to cook it, and eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with its water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs, along with its entrails, and you shall not leave any of it over until morning, but whatever is left of it until morning, you shall burn with fire. It's to be completely consumed. It's not where you injure the lamb or eat part of it and save enough more for a rainy day. It's to be used completely. Now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hands. In other words, you're going to eat it ready to go, ready to travel. You shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. Notice what he says, against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. God says, I'm not only judging Pharaoh, I'm not only judging Egypt, I'm judging the gods of Egypt. What I have done was set against that which is worshipped in Egypt, including the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's sons, because they were worshipped as though they were gods. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So where the blood has been applied, now if the blood isn't applied, death comes. But if the blood is applied, then that death has already taken place. The animal has died instead of the firstborn and served as a substitute. Now this day will be a memorial to you, and you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. This was the first Passover, but it was to be followed every year by a memorial meal in which they would remember what God had done. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, but on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats anything leavened from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. So, excuse me, the Passover was to be on the 14th day, the first day of this week, and then what would follow would be a week of unleavened bread. And he says in verse 20, you shall not eat anything leavened in all your dwellings. You shall eat unleavened bread for the entire week. Once the Passover had begun, no leaven, no yeast, the thing that causes the bread to rise. So the bread's going to be very flat when it's baked. Leaven is to be removed. Leaven represents influence, and for that entire week there would be no outside influence upon what they ate, and it signifies how once Passover has come, once they've been removed from Egypt, they're to leave Egypt behind and leave behind all those influences. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, go and take for yourselves lambs according to your families, and slay the Passover lamb. You shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood which is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the two doorposts, and none of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. That will be the place of safety. The place that's under the blood is the place of safety. No blood, no safety, and death comes instead. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over. That's why it's called Passover. The Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come in to your houses to smite you. And you shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. When you enter the land which the Lord will give you, as he promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children say to you, what does this rite mean to you? You shall say, it is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but spared our homes. And the people bowed low, and they worshipped. Notice the response of people. They're going to obey the ritual, but also there's a response of worship. Because when you see the salvation that God has provided, the result is that you worship him. Then the sons of Israel went and did so just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. Now it came about at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle, and they all died. That's the story. That's what took place. Now there is in Egypt a place that bears testimony to this story. You see, Pharaoh rose in the night, he and his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead. And you can go to the Sphinx, that monument that stands in front of the Great Pyramid and a couple other pyramids there. Now, the Sphinx is much older than the Exodus event. It was already ancient in that day. But lying between the paws of the Sphinx, you can barely see it in this picture, so let's blow it up. Between the paws of the Sphinx, there's a monument, we call it the Sphinx Monument, which was put many hundreds and hundreds of years later, and this was put here by a pharaoh by the name of Thutmose, or Thutmosis if you care, the fourth. And he comes a generation after the Exodus event, as I understand the chronology. And as soon as he came to the throne, he put up this monument, and in this monument he told a story about how when he was young, maybe a boy, I'm not sure how old he was, but when he was young, a prophet came to him, according to the story, and told him that he would reign instead of his older brother, who, if this is indeed the correct chronology, who might have been that firstborn who died in the plague. And now this inscription tells how he is reigning instead of his older brother, instead of the firstborn, and now he is king of Egypt. Well, Exodus chapter 12, verse 31, then he, that is the Pharaoh, called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go worship the Lord as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go and bless me also. The Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we will all be dead, which there was a certain truth to that. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls bound up in the clothes on their shoulders. That you remember, they had been told, eat the meal girded, and they were ready. Their bags were packed, they were ready to go. Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. This was going to supply the materials for the tabernacle. Verse 36, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of Egyptians, so that they let them have their requests. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. As we said, this is back pay for 400 years of labor. We're told in the New Testament that Christ, our Passover, has also been sacrificed. Jesus is described as the fulfillment of this Passover picture. So that as we look at the Passover and we look at Jesus, we're going to see a commonality between the two. In the Passover, the lamb was to be selected several days prior to its slaying, and you will remember that Jesus came to the temple several days before his crucifixion, and was publicly presented before the people. The Passover was to be there was to be a lamb for each household. In the case of Jesus, he was the single lamb for the entire world. The lamb in the Passover was to be an unblemished male in the prime of his life. Jesus was without sin, and his death took place in the prime of his life. In the case of the Passover was to be killed at the setting of the sun on the 14th day. And as I read the Gospels, I'm given to understand that Jesus went to the cross in the morning prior to the Passover, and that he breathed his last at the 9th hour, his body being taken down from the cross just prior to the setting of the sun, so that he becomes our Passover. The entire congregation was to be involved in the killing, and really, in the case of Jesus, the entire world, in a sense, is involved in his killing. People ask, who killed Jesus? Well, we all did, in a sense, because he died for us, so that we might have life through him. But the blood must be applied. That is, you must believe in him.